All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to the Deadly Analysis podcast. I have a really important clarification to make at the start of this show. As you all know, I am the host of this podcast. I do this show with a lot of people that I consider my friends. I'm here today with Shayra, with Jim, and with Ben. And when I think about who this podcast is for at the end of the day, my answer is pretty simple. It's a podcast for us. And if you don't like that, you can just get out. So, I thought this was going to be a serious intro. Like I started so serious. Can I say? I love puns. I just peel them off one by one. They're tethered to my mindset. So today's podcast is a review and analysis of Jordan Peterson. That may happen more than once tonight. Jordan Peele's second horror film, Us. His first being Get Out, which was highly praised by all of us on this podcast. Peele clearly has the ability to make next level horror films. And when I say next level, I mean shit that lasts, that lingers, stuff that has metaphor, but it's also viscerally satisfying at the same time as a horror fan. And I think Us is no exception to that. So if you are new to this podcast, I think it's worth reminding our viewers, we do this every once in a while, that on this podcast, we make a distinction between enjoying a horror film and appreciating a horror film. In the same way that you would, maybe enjoy a good whiskey, right? You can enjoy a whiskey by mixing it with Coke or drinking it with ice, just however you want. Blasphemy don't even matter, just however you want to do it. But appreciating whiskey is different. There's a particular glass that you use to help bring out particular notes of smell or taste. There's sort of an objective component and a subjective component. And that's how we sort of discuss horror films here on this podcast. We talk about what we liked and disliked, the subjective stuff, but we also talk about directing style, cinematography, use of music, things like that. And I think I speak for everybody here when I say that horror films, if they're done well, are culturally valuable things. Like, we don't often see them that way because of the ever-present fog of shit like Sleepaway Camp 3 or Annabelle's Triumphant Return Part 8, shit like that. But Jaws, The Exorcist, Halloween, right? These are sort of a different caliber of horror. These hit something communal and fundamental about the human experience, which is why I think they last so long. It's why 50 years down the line, we'll probably still be talking about Silence of the Lambs and not Piranha 3D, right? So good horror films are informative in a sense. They reflect societal fears, as we've seen on this podcast, deeply personal fears as well. And fears tell us things about one another. They shed light on our place in the world, right? Horror is an avenue in cinema where there's meat on the bone, as it were, which takes us into Jordan Peele's 2019 horror film, Us. So as always, spoilers from here on out. I don't know why I'm saying as always. I usually jump right into the spoilers. But today you get a warning. From here, spoilers on out. So Us is about a young woman named Adelaide Wilson who, accompanied by her husband, son, and daughter, returned to the beachfront home where she grew up as a child. Haunted by traumatic experience from the past, Adelaide grows increasingly concerned that something bad is going to happen. Her worst fears soon become a reality when four strangers descend upon the house, forcing the Wilsons into a fight for survival. And the family is horrified to learn that each attacker takes the exact appearance of one of them. So I'll kind of start with my thoughts. Usually I throw it to one of the co-hosts, but I selected Get Out, so I'll just give a quick intro about why I selected this movie to discuss tonight. I really enjoyed the movie. Here's my summary right here. I really enjoyed the film, but I thought Get Out was a superior film by Jordan Peele. And that's the problem with knocking it out of the park on your first film, right? It's the same fear that I have with Ari Aster doing Midsommar after Hereditary. Like, even if the second film is fantastic, it's going to be seen in light of the fucking home run that you just hit. And Get Out was barely 2 years ago and people are still talking about it. And they will for a very long time. So knowing this, I want to do my best to detach this film from the success of Get Out, even though I just compared it to Get Out, as best as I can. I felt like Us was more of a traditional horror film than I was expecting from Peele, in the sense that there was things like home invasion, being chased by enigmatic villains with sharp objects. There's blood and viscera. There's a final girl, right? So there's more traditional horror elements in this movie than I was expecting, and I totally dug that. It was a good window, I think, into what Peele would or maybe would not do, or been able to pull off, rather, as he pushes his way through the horror genre. After all, this is, I believe, his second of 4 horror films that he is slated to make. So to keep my thoughts short, look, I thought the acting in this movie was fantastic. Lupita Nyong'o's performance, in my mind, was up there with Toni Collette in Hereditary. Did not expect that. But like even more so, the music in this movie absolutely made it what it is. I mean, we all know the sort of remix, I got 5 on it, but it's really the rest of the soundtrack that is absolutely masterful. You can go listen to the entire thing on YouTube. I believe this is Michael Abel's second film score. So there's this kind of like new blood sort of vibe from Peele to Abel's. This is just a really fantastic time for the genre, sort of the emergence of new talent in the world of horror. So the music in this film was absolutely superb. This is a horror film with purpose, right? Like every little thing in this movie is deliberate, and we'll probably get into, what a lot of those are this evening. And I think to a certain type of audience, films like this, and likely most of Jordan Peele's horror films, are going to appear somewhat preachy, maybe. There's social components and metaphor to this movie that are pretty heavy-handed. The most obvious being when Adelaide, asks Red, her copy, her doppelganger, what are you people? And Red says, we're Americans, right? Of all the things she could say, she says, we're Americans. And so us becomes sort of US, right? Like United States. There's a very heavy-handed slide into, what could possibly be seen as American societal hierarchy in the United States. And by the way, with that specific scene, I love how she phrased her question. That was very purposeful. It wasn't, who are you people, which makes sense. It was, what are you people, right? There's a very dehumanizing component to that question. And so when Red answers, we're Americans, it's shocking. It's sort of a different level, a higher level than we're expecting. It's a different level answer than we're expecting. So, the shadow people, those down there, as it were, the people upon which, the people upon whose back we've built what we have up here today, right? I think that's a large part of the social commentary going on in this movie. But personally, for me, I like looking at this film in a bit more narrowed and individual sort of way, right? The social duality is certainly there, but I like to scope in on the personal level. After all, each of us has a tethered, right? The tethered exists in a sort of one-to-one way. We each have our own. You and I and everyone else each have a shadowed side that we push down, as it were, underneath the surface. So I like the idea of the tethered, the tethered as a physical manifestation of something like the unconscious, or our repressed fears, or our anxieties, or our traumas, or maybe our carnalities, something like that. It's really open to interpretation. I guess I take a somewhat Jungian interpretation of this movie, something you'll never, ever hear me say again, right? Like us feels like Carl Jung's idea of the shadow self writ large. Jung's idea of the shadow self has been described as the sum of all personal and collective psychic elements, which because of their incompatibility with chosen attitudes are denied expressions in life. Right? Basically, all we need is Jordan Peterson going down into the sewers with a sword yelling, Dad, Dad, I'm here to save you. Like, that's what I got from this movie for some strange reason. The phrase denied expression in life, like, that's what the tethered are, right? They exist down there in the shadow world, mimicking us up here, but in a distinctly incompatible way. I'm eating pancakes and waffles, and tethered Noah is down there eating the meat off of a bunny rabbit. Right? For every up here action, there is a down there action. The metaphor to me being something like, for every cordial handshake I have with my enemy, there's a down there Noah that rips his hand off, right? There's like this repressed id-like shadow engulfed in a kind of carnality that at times makes its way to the surface. And it meets us in a hall of mirrors, of all places, right? We get a glimpse of it when we stare at ourselves in the mirror for too long. And I like to take the movie that way. That seems to me to be something that I got out of the film fairly quickly. And if we take the movie that way, if you share my interpretation, it gives us a picture of what it may look like were we to all let that part of who we are come to the surface, to take precedent, to no longer be denied expression in life. It would be a hands across America where each of our repressed carnal selves would hold hands and for the first time bask in the sunlight. Which is just a fucking terrifying idea. Like, to me, that is a terrifying idea. It's a great question to pose in a horror film. And this is why I love horror movies. And like, what other genre film can you so freely and overtly reflect that kind of exploration in a way that makes sense, right? So those are my opening thoughts of the film. I don't think there's any one way to interpret this movie. I think it's very open-ended, but I like to think of this film as that kind of an exploration. But that's also probably because I'm a sick fuck who's deeply in touch with all my vices. Me and my tethered, we're like homies. We eat those rabbits together. But what about you guys? I mean, opening thoughts. I know it's a lot. I know I'm not the only sick fuck on this podcast. So any other thoughts? Opening thoughts on us? Take it away.
Well, I think you you got into a metaphorical interpretation of this film, and I share some of your thoughts, not all of them. I think metaphorically, this film is really quite brilliant because the film it's you mentioned some of the political aspects of this film, how Us also sort of works as a monogram for the United States, for America. And in this particularly politically divisive time, and in this time when we are dealing with a deeply divided and, in fact, demonizing the other side, I'll sort of reference it. There's a great Onion headline that was the division in the country is due to all of the sons of bitches on the other side, and that type of division that's currently in our country. I think that's what Jordan Peele is talking about, because the doppelgangers and the tethered and the main characters, or purported main characters, the Wilson family, are in fact the same, yet they see themselves as one side being completely evil and the other side sees themselves as being completely good. And it's only after the encounter of those that one side gets to realize that, well, both sides get to realize that we are the same, that we're the same group of people, even though we're all Americans, even though one side is actively trying to undermine and in fact murder the other. So I think it works metaphorically about the divisiveness that's currently going on. I also think it works on a level as it relates to race and class in our current political backdrop, because you referenced Jung. I'm gonna reference Homi Bhabha, who is a post-colonial theorist. He talks about the idea of hybridity, and that is, in any oppressive environment, two people are created. I'll instead of explain it the way Bhabha explains it, I'll try and explain it in a little bit more relatable way. You may have a job that's oppressive, and your boss may be an oppressive person, and he or she walks up to you and says, do this ridiculous thing, and on the surface you're like, sure, of course I will do the thing that you ask, but inside you're like, you motherfucker, I'm gonna hurt you. So there's two people that are created. And then Bhabha explains this in a post-colonial context. So imagine that division, that hybridity, that you are both the person saying yes, but also the person resisting. Now, explode that into the oppression as it relates to the racial dynamics within the United States, and the African American experience in the United States. So you've got an oppressive environment that's sort of forcing this duality on this entire group of people, in both a racial and class sense. And so here's a metaphorical representation of the altered, the group of people who are repressed and oppressed, and who don't have the same opportunities, and who could be like the people up above, except they don't have the opportunity to exist in that place. And so then we sort of get this metaphorical interpretation of hybridity as it relates to race relations in the US. And I find both of those metaphorical interpretations, in fact, I find this whole movie metaphorically to be a masterpiece. We'll get into some of my other issues with the film later, but I think metaphorically it works as a statement of hybridity as it relates to race and class, and also a discussion of how our politically divisive times are not so that we're not as divided as we construct ourselves to be.
So if I could, I want to expand on that a little bit too. I'd maybe provide some additional examples that I saw that kind of like play into that, Jim, because I think that's a really good call out. Talking about the divisiveness in the country and kind of like the duality there, which of course duality is a huge theme in this movie. In fact, it might be the most obvious theme. There are a couple of particular points toward the beginning of the movie that I thought were incredibly interesting playing into this point. The first was, of course, whenever the family is all driving together in the car, they're going toward the beach house, and I Got Five on It comes on for the first time. They start singing this together, and Jason in the back asks what the song is about, right? And so his sister tells him it's about drugs, and his dad's like, no, it's not about drugs, it's a dope song, but it's not about drugs, right? And then like immediately in that same kind of like line of thinking, he's singing about it, messing with that Indo weed. Like, I mean, he knows what it's about. He's essentially lying to his son to protect him. But then following that also, Adelaide turns around and like uses this beat and stuff to kind of like try and teach her son about music and like get him into the beat and stuff like that. And there's kind of like this repression of what the song actually is, in order to try and also bring that along as part of like a shared culture, right? There's another point too, I really want to point out when they're around the dinner table and Jason says bullshit or something like that. He calls something bullshit, I think is what it is. And then his dad tells him not to cuss. But then immediately following that for the rest of the movie, you hear him using quite a few swear words, right? So it's like this sort of almost like a hypocrisy that you see. And if we do sort of tie that back into American culture, I think it's quite obvious, right? Because we're very proud, I think, of our roots and where we come from. We talk about this country being one of liberty, of freedom, of equality. Many of those elements are in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. But what we also try to sweep under the rug is that in building a culture supposedly built on those things, we've committed genocide, we've enslaved other human beings, we've oppressed many different groups, and we kind of want to pretend that that's not there, but at the same time sort of praise who we are and where we come from as kind of like this beacon of virtue. And it just doesn't, I think, work, right? I mean, there's like a huge disservice that happens by trying to ignore those things that did in fact occur, that we did perpetrate, in the name of building a society which contradicts all of the actions that we actually took.
Yeah, I think you're right on there, Ben, and it's upon us to remember our history in that sense. I read a student paper just today that was saying something along the lines of, if you don't like it here, leave, or shut up. And I'm like, oh yeah, because well, if you don't like it here, leave and then shut up because the soldiers died for your freedom. And I'm like, oh, the freedom to leave. I didn't write this because that would make me a bad teacher. But oh yeah, the freedom to leave or shut up or to say what I want to say about what I'm seeing. There is that sort of contradiction in American culture. And when we get into Easter eggs, I think the I Got Five on It is an Easter egg in and of itself. There's a thing that happens there that I think is a nice little Easter egg that we should call out. But until then, what did you think, Shayra?
I think I Got Five on It is socialism, and it's piling your money together to get some weed, dude. So I want to talk a little bit about, Jordan Peele has two movies. We've got Get Out, and then we've got now Us. And I feel like they are very much tied together. I think Jordan Peele's even talked about how they're kind of tied together. But one of the most interesting aspects of it, in Get Out, you have him falling into what is it? What does he refer to?
The
as?
sunken place.
Yeah, the sunken place. And then now we have an underground like tunnel people thing going on. It's always like there's a trap going down under. And even when in Get Out, when he goes down into the basement and he's like hooked up to the chair to look at the TV, he's down in a basement and there's who knows what's going down underneath this house. Like maybe there's a complete entire society underground that's all working through the government, doing scientific experimentation and other types of things to people. And we see this in the beginning opening scene in Us, where we have the camera panning out. We see all these rabbits. Rabbits tend to be used for, they breed a lot, so you can do a lot of experimentation on them. And obviously they're great for yummy, crunchy food for the underground people. But I find it very interesting that they're all like underground. All this experimentation is underground. It's very much trying to call out the Illuminati or the government institutions, the powers that be. It's this very be afraid. I need to put on my tinfoil cap when I discuss this stuff. But you actually see this come up with the organization that's in Get Out. It's something like the Red something was the organization that the family worked for. And then now we have Red, and she gets everybody to wear red jumpsuits. And so I feel like there's very much an interconnection of this powers that be that are doing scientific experimentation. I will not be surprised if Jordan Peele's next film has some kind of scientific experimentation that goes on again. So I feel like there's definitely a connection with the films. And you can tell that Jordan Peele likes to connect with other films that he wasn't a part of and say little Easter eggs and stuff. So we'll get into Easter eggs, but I think he wants to have Easter eggs within all of his films, kind of like with Pixar, where they always have the pizza truck in the background. I think he's going to be one of those filmmakers. So it's important to pay attention with all the stuff that's going on, because there's probably going to be little hints at things throughout all of his filmography that will interconnect all of his, like, it's all in the same world, you know? So
yeah, and I think you're right to sort of note that this is always going underground or repressed in some way, because I think that's sort of the key to understanding Peele's conceptions of race and culture and African American culture. In particular, I think The Sunken Place works as a really great visual metaphor for the marginalization of African Americans. And in the same case, I think there's a sense of marginalization to the tethered. The line that really unlocked this film for me was when one of the characters said they built it for power and control. And that's where I was like, oh, okay, now I understand the whole metaphorical interpretation behind this thing, or how it all sort of ties together. Do we want to get into Easter eggs, guys, or do you got more ideas about metaphors and metaphorical interpretations of this thing?
Yeah, there was one other thing. Shara, I might have missed this. When you were talking about rabbits in the underground part, did you happen to mention Through the Looking Glass? I
definitely thought of it over and over again. There were many moments where there was a lot of rabbits. Let's go into rabbits. You go ahead and give your rabbit stuff, and then I'll give my rabbit stuff. How about that?
All right, cool. I'll do some rabbit stuff really quick. I'm sorry, like I was trying to pay attention, but I was having to pour myself some more vodka, because of course it is vodka o'clock, guys. Yeah, so like the rabbit thing, I really felt like, I'm not sure 100% if this is an Easter egg or not, Waka Waka, but I do think that ties into kind of like a Through the Looking Glass sort of thing, right? Because like, as you're talking about being underground, in the book, I think that's exactly how Alice falls into Wonderland, right? She's like by this tree and falls through into a rabbit hole, and I guess like that's where we get that expression, and then goes down underground into this place where everything is the opposite of the way it's supposed to be, right? And so like then of course that turns into the whole theme about duality, and kind of like the mirror image stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think it was an amazing idea to make such a big part of this movie about rabbits, because I think it's another way that he can kind of bring that idea forward about not only kind of like the underground theme, we're going into a place underneath, that kind of thing where things get crazy, but also sort of the mirror image and duality imagery, I guess.
Yeah, the rabbit stuff I have to bring up is, first off, I've tried to look into why Jordan Peele put rabbits in, see what his insight is. It's really just that he's deathly afraid of rabbits. He thinks they're really scary. So that's why he put rabbits in. Honestly, like I was like, that's the most honest like thing ever. He's like, everybody else thinks bunnies are cute, but they are scary as shit. Like he's just so scared of rabbits. But I also found some people that were talking about the fact that rabbits' ears kind of look like scissors, trying to go to that whole scissors thing. But the thing with rabbits is they I think they were all over the place. You see it on what's the name of her daughter's her daughter? Anyway,
Zora.
Yes. She has a bunny on her shirt, but also she even wears a shirt at one point where in Vietnamese it says like it's Vietnamese for rabbit or bunny. So for some reason the rabbit and bunny kept being tied to the daughter. So I don't know if you guys noticed that or why you think she was more tied to the bunny stuff than the other characters.
I've got something for that, I think.
Ooh, okay, please.
Yeah. So she's the one who likes to run, correct? She's the runner. She's track and field. If we think back to Get Out, right? What was that song, Noah, that you said that
Beat me to it.
Yeah,
Beat me to it. I was
Go
sitting here
for it, dude.
screaming. I was sitting here screaming with the camera. I was like, oh my God, it's not even in my notes. You guys totally made me think of that. The opening of Get Out is Run Rabbit. Run rabbit, run rabbit, run, 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 bang, 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 bang goes the farmer's gun, right? Like my grandfather used to sing that to me when I was a kid, which I am completely removing from my family lineage, even though it had nothing to do with bad things. That was the song in Get Out, and I can't sing it anymore with a straight face. But yeah, you're right. That's the opening song of Get Out. Crazy.
Oh my gosh. So she's interconnected with Get Out too. I've told you, I'm telling you, I think he's like trying to interconnect all the movies.
Wild.
I think he's interconnecting the movies metaphorically and thematically. I just don't know if he's like, I don't think that Us and Get Out exist in the same cinematic universe. Like that's.
He's been quiet on that. Yeah, he's been quiet on that. Everyone and their mom has asked him that, and he says, "Not going to answer."
I don't think so. I mean,
it's so we can argue. That's the point. It's so we can argue then.
Right. Yeah. And you brought up the scissors. I think scissors work as another metaphorical thing as well, because those are two blades that are identical that work together to cut, to divide something, and metaphorically that fits with all of our interpretations thus far. So,
I think what we should do.
Go ahead.
We should each do an Easter egg. Go down the line and let's see how many we can do.
Okay.
No? All right.
Yeah. I mean, mine, she's not, when she's doing See the Rhythm, and she's snapping her fingers,
it's off.
She's completely off. Like I think it's on the 1 and 3 that she's snapping, and it's not even close to right. Now, either that's an ADR mistake, or that's it's an early clue that she is not, that she's slightly off, that she is not perhaps of this world, which of course we get to see later on. And then, early formation of rhythm and rhythm recognition, it happens when you're very young. And so it makes sense that she would not understand rhythm as well. So that's my. You were talking about Easter eggs, but that scene when they're.
Nope, that's a good one. I'm marking it off my list. That was on my list.
And then I got 5 on it. Is about 2 people. One of them only has half of the cost for a dime bag. And there's another sense of duality. One is only half of the whole. So okay, you guys go with your Easter eggs. No, I know you got a big list.
Those were good. Yeah, that was really good. Adelaide's dad at the pier. What game is he playing at the beginning? One of the games he's playing is when Adelaide goes missing is whack-a-mole. Which is about pushing.
Not even hitting anything.
Yeah, that bothered me so much. He's like, nah, I got it. And he's just sitting hitting the same thing. I'm like, okay, why did actually try to hit the damn moles anyway? Yeah, but it's about pushing down, get back in your hole, that sort of thing, right? All right, well, who else?
Shayra.
Okay, I'll get one. Fuck the police comes straight from the underground. I will say this. When that song came on in the theater, everyone just went ape shit laughing their fucking asses off. Of course, it's a horrific scene too. You're like, I don't know how to react. So it's just everyone's going crazy. That was a fun moment in the theater, honestly.
Yeah, that was probably one of the funniest lines in the whole theater, or in the whole film, except for perhaps, what are micro machines? What's Home Alone?
Or mine that I laughed hysterically at. The police are already on their way. That probably made me, I was in tears. I was hooting so damn loud in the theater. Anyway.
All right, so I think the only one that I've even remotely got is kind of like something that Jim had already brought up, right? And so if this is US and we're meant to understand this as like a metaphor for the United States, and we know that there's some heavy themes in here about like government control, I kind of thought that the duality and the imagery of the scissors, you're talking about two halves of the same kind of like utensil built to divide, was sort of like a direct metaphor to the two major political parties in the United States, both the Republicans and the Democrats secretly working together to keep everyone divided and sort of attacking each other so they can maintain control. I mean, if we're going to go into tinfoil hat territory, I can bust out full on Alex Jones if we need to and talk about the chemicals in the water that are turning the friggin' frog.
That's why we're here. Totally.
That's what the daughter did, actually. She went into that territory. She started talking about fluoride in the water to control the people when they were in the car. The parents were kind of like, what the f- are you looking at on your phone? I love that reaction. They're like, what?
I think that's probably like literally the only major one that I have, though. I'm really bad at this game, guys.
Oh, I have a ton. Okay, so one of my favorites was Goonies was on the shelf, and you actually later on when Red is talking, she quotes Mikey. And remember, because Red is actually Adelaide, she had seen Goonies, so she quotes Mikey when she talks about when it's their time. And so I don't know if you guys watched the Goonies, but if you have not watched the Goonies, they basically are in this underground craziness, all different kinds of fun little mazes they go through in the underground. And at one point, the leader, Mikey, talks about how it's their time down there. And basically all the people up there can suck it because they're the Goonies. And they're going to kick ass and they're going to find the pirate ship and the money. So I loved that she referenced Mikey when she's talking shit. And that was actually a huge hint for me that she was actually Adelaide.
All right, I'm going to do all the repetitions of 11, the number 11. Ready? In the opening scene, the news promo, right? It's 11. It's like 11 news at 11, right? Adelaide, when she's at the fairground, when she's a little kid, and her father asks, which one do you want? She says, I want 11. I want 11. The alarm clock hits 11:11 right before the doppelgangers attack. That's the obvious one. My favorite one, though, is the obvious and very overt Jeremiah 11:11, which, as I'm sure everyone knows, says, I will bring on them a disaster they cannot escape. Although they will cry out, I will not listen to them. Now that, you could stop there. But if you, here's the brilliance of Jordan Peele. If you actually know the context of that verse, the Jews had essentially in that passage, it's talking about how the Jews had forgotten their own history, right? That's how perfect this is, like who they were. This is like Adelaide forgetting her past as a doppelganger, which I thought was just like, oh, at this point I was like, I'm watching every film this guy makes. Fuck me, dude. So those are all my 11s. Do you have any more? Oh, no, there's one more. Where is it? The ambulance. I think
that's what I was going to say. The ambulance.
Yeah, the ambulance has 11. So that's all of 11 that I caught.
There was also an audio one when the dad was watching the game. The score was tied at 11:11.
I didn't know that. Oh shit! Nice.
I noticed 11:11 just because one of my husband's like really close family friends is into paganism and witchcraft and all that stuff, and she's obsessed with 11:11. So whenever we're hanging out with her and it hits 11:11, she's like, "All right, everybody, stop! This is the lucky time. Everybody has to stop and make a wish." And I'm like, "What the fuck is this shit?"
Next time she does that, plan to have the power go out. That's all I gotta say.
Oh no! Don't let her watch this movie. She'll be like, "You're ruining 11:11."
All right, let's keep this going. What other? You guys have any other ones?
Chud, we should discuss Chud. That was referenced. There were monsters that were from down in the sewers and the streets that were taking women and small dogs, ripping them down into the sewers. And obviously this has those types. They're not really monsters though; they're people. But sure, we can say
there's a government cover up in Chud.
Government cover up.
A Nightmare on Elm Street is sitting right next in that same opening.
Do you guys like my sweater for today? By the way,
I was wondering if that was purposeful. There we go.
This is as Freddy Krueger as I can be, but I had to go with the Freddy Krueger references that are so abundant. The glove, the ooh, I'm going to be creepy with my fingers. I was like, all right, Freddy Krueger, you're freaking me out. Stop it.
I was going as a craft beer hipster, which I think I nailed personally. Even though it has nothing to do with any of this film.
I was wearing a bald guy in a suit. Michael Jackson is all over this thing as well. Yes. Thriller. Obviously, Jordan Peele did not know that he was going to release the film while Michael Jackson was in the cultural zeitgeist. Thankfully, he didn't know that. And so and Thriller, of course, is a music. I don't need to.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that there's stuff from Thriller in this movie? I can't believe that. That is just too hard to. What?
Look, I know I'm stretching, Noah, but I think that this film invites a metaphorical reading. So I thought that, okay.
They were all wearing one glove.
That was the other thing I was going to mention. But don't worry, Noah, you don't have to follow me down this rabbit hole. All right. There was another Easter egg that I had, but I can't remember what it is.
Itsy Bitsy Spider. Itsy Bitsy Spider.
Yes. Okay.
Right. What's the Itsy Bitsy Spider song? Right. I'm not going to sing it. This is not happening. Don't look at me like that. The Itsy Bitsy Spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Up came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the Itsy Bitsy Spider went up the spout again. So Adelaide is singing this in the Hall of Mirrors. Also, notice that Adelaide, when she's in the beach house, sees a spider, wigs her out. Right. This is the song about coming up. All the rain is dried up, and the Itsy Bitsy Spider comes out the spout again.
But notice that with the spider on the coffee table, there's a fake spider, and the real spider comes out from under the fake spider as a way to say to fake Adelaide, this bitch is coming for you. And actually, if you think about it, the real Adelaide is the scary one in this, because when she's going through this mirrored room, which the tethered one is going to be going through there too, right? Adelaide's essentially singing, we're going to wash you out. You're going to try to come out, but we're going to wash you back down that drain. And it's like, in a way, Adelaide's the scary one. She's wearing a Thriller shirt, and she is threatening,
Man, I really want to latch onto that comment that you just made about real Adelaide. All right, is there any more Easter egg stuff? Because I'm about to
No, I like where you're going. I got more, but I want to go where you're taking this. Go.
All right, guys. So one of my favorite things about this movie, by the way, was that I really don't think there was any clear bad guy except for maybe the government, right? maybe the government, but I honestly don't see the tethered coming up and doing their thing as honestly kind of all that unreasonable. Sure, they're killing, right? I mean, and it's the violence and that kind of makes it obvious that they're sort of the antagonists of the movie, I suppose. But whenever you think from their perspective, I think their actions seem totally justified, right? Their entire lives, they are entirely determined by this other version of themselves that gets to live this wonderful life, and sort of they have to mirror that in some type of horrific way. They're repressed underground. They're forced to eat raw rabbit. It's like a terrible existence that they're forced to endure. And the only way that they can really escape from that is by rising up and killing that other half. But ultimately, I think what we see here isn't a really kind of a good and evil sort of comparison. I really think it's just sort of a struggle to live from both sides. And I think there's obviously some very Nietzschean stuff going on here, right? So it's whenever we have Adelaide going into the Hall of Mirrors at the very beginning, she looks into the mirrors and stares into this, and eventually the mirror stares back, right? She's looking into the void until the void stares back. But if we go in from that into kind of this whole will to power thing, I really think that's kind of I think that's sort of what's going on here. I mean, both sides are really just sort of struggling to survive, and that's pretty much the end of it, right? I mean, like, both sides are completely reasonable. One side is trying to defend themselves, the other side is trying to defend themselves, and what we see is just sort of like the resulting clash. And I don't necessarily think either Adelaide can be shown to be either the fake one or the real one, because I mean, the original, the tethered one, is the one that came up, yes, in the beginning of the movie, but throughout the entire 20 years or 30 years that it's presumed that she has lived on the surface, she seems to essentially have developed into this normally functioning human being with a totally normal life. She has kids that she obviously cares about. She has a husband that she seems to love. And other than that, I mean, there's really no indication that she has any sort of distinction from her and any other type of person. And even though they describe the tethered as being like just a physical copy without a soul, it seems sort of obvious that there's, I mean, like, I don't think that you can view the Adelaide that we know, the main character, as being sort of soulless, because she does have those kind of connections. And I think that's sort of a sign that she has developed. But I mean, also on the other side of that, the Red that we know, which is actually Adelaide, I suppose, from the beginning, has sort of gone the other direction, and she started there, and she supposedly has that soul, but she's sort of devolved because the pressures of her environment have driven her to a state of insanity. So which one really is real? I mean, that's one of the key issues that sort of plays out here. I think that's one of the biggest question marks that we're left with at the end of the movie. Like, who are you rooting for? Are you upset that the fake one survived, right? Or the fake one that came out at the beginning of the movie? Or does it seem like the good guy won? It's really hard to make that distinction. I think it's very hard, and it's a huge question mark for me.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think you're hitting on exactly what some of the metaphorical interpretations of this film would lead you to hit on. And you explained it really well too. Yes, I agree with you completely. And the only thing that I would add is that there was one line where they were talking about they learned how to. This is the real Adelaide, the one who's lived underground all her life. She says they learned how to clone the body, but they could not clone a soul. So essentially, these two beings are sharing a soul. One who's deprived of all opportunities, deprived of all human interaction, except for the dumb show that they're supposed to engage in, mirroring the people up above. So in fact, the rising up of this group of people is a group of people trying to reclaim the soul, or make themselves whole, make themselves the real Adelaide, the real Winston Duke character, the real whoever. And in that sense, for me, for someone whose sympathies almost always ally with those who are oppressed, I struggle to find this to be a down ending when I see that the tethered have been largely successful. I also struggle to see it as a down ending when when Adelaide ends up being victorious in the end. So I think you're right when you're kind of pointing us toward the moral ambiguity. Is it considered best that the originally tethered Adelaide is the one who's triumphant? I don't know. Is it considered best that the tethered have been largely successful as they do their hands across America in the final shot? I don't know. I mean, I have my sympathies with the oppressed mostly, so in a way, I have to ally myself with the people in red. It's a morally ambiguous ending to this film, and a film that's begging us to consider our own morality as we're relating with, as we're trying to figure out how to view the ending of this movie.
If only we had a moral philosopher as part of this podcast. Cough, cough, Garrett, who couldn't make it tonight. We have a comment in the chat from Bloodsport that says the ending is symbolic of a slave rebellion. I found to be interesting.
He's
Yeah,
not.
can I hit on that?
I you're right.
I would like to actually talk about this. So one of the interesting aspects of this film was that they talked about Hands Across America, and when Jordan Peele was researching stuff on YouTube, he came across the commercial for it, and he was like, "This is scary and creepy as fuck." Like, what the fuck, 80s? But Hands Across America was referred to as the most 80s thing to happen in the 80s. It is an event where people were thinking they could come together to help others and failed miserably. It lasted all of 15 minutes. The amount of money that they raised was basically enough to cover the event and nothing to actually help homeless people or people that were downtrodden. A lot of celebrities were involved in the music videos and stuff incorporated with it. It was an absolutely ridiculous fiasco. And so when Red gets a bunch of the people who've been suppressed, who have been pushed underground to achieve this thing that others couldn't, it was a way of saying, you guys have continuously put us down here. We have had absolutely nothing. We've had absolutely none of the privilege you've had, and we achieved something you motherfuckers could never do. And it's definitely kick-ass. Like, what they do is kick-ass. And honestly, when we think about marginalized groups and people that we say can't do enough, we hear all these things about they're lazy or they're just not doing enough. I think Jimmy Kimmel went and had someone asking a bunch of little kids on the street, why do you think women make less money than men? And all the kids were like, well, women are lazy. They're just shopping online the whole time. I mean, they were saying some crazy shit about women that was so like, what the fuck? There was only a couple of kids that were like, no, my mom is actually a hard worker. But most of the kids were like, oh, women just want to sit around. And we think about, obviously, with Black people, with Mexican people, a lot of people have these like, oh, they're lazy. They don't do anything. So what they are essentially doing is saying, hey, we could actually do this thing you guys couldn't do because you said topography got in your way. Fuck your topography. We'll fucking hold hands across America when you guys couldn't. I think it's pretty powerful shit.
Yeah, there's a sense of reckoning. The more you guys are talking, the more I'm realizing that this film has a heavy emphasis on like the reckoning, sort of comeuppance and you know, we talked at the very beginning about sort of pushing down, but this movie ends with the spilling over, the coming up, which I think is ominous. In a lot of ways, I think it's powerful and important, and it's something that seems to be part and parcel of Peele's films. I don't know. Just the more you guys are talking, I'm realizing there's kind of a reckoning aspect to this movie. Also, Ben, I put in my notes. You very briefly mentioned Nietzsche, and I put in the notes, and I have no context for this. I don't remember why I put it in there, but I put, when you stare into the Adelaide stares into you. I can't really contextualize that any better. I didn't really pursue any notes under that, so I thought I'd just add that for you.
Well, it also speaks to the ending. Also speaks to you know, a rather shallow sense of morality and a rather shallow sense of togetherness. Hands Across America was a largely symbolic thing that meant to represent this view of brotherhood and sisterhood, and yet it was a colossal failure. And you know, this is exactly the type of reckoning, as you mentioned, Noah, that a 6-year-old girl or a 8-year-old girl would think is the moral equivalent of a just end. And obviously, since the real organization was a bit of a failure, it seems, I don't know if we should read the ending as unambiguously a success, because it's not. It's a largely symbolic gesture that doesn't actually accomplish much. Does that make sense? Or
they accomplished more than the people above ground, and they managed to cut their fucking umbilical cord and make sure that they could control their own bodies from now on instead of having it controlled by someone else like a puppet. I mean, if you listen to what Red was saying when she was talking about how this one girl met her prince, but the other girl was forced to have sex with someone she didn't necessarily want to do stuff with and have babies torn out of her that she didn't get to make decisions about. Someone else was controlling the situation and she had no say. That's really fucking frightening. And, you know, we talked about Alien at one point in time during our discussion of the shows, and the idea of this like alien being implanted in you and coming out of your stomach, and it's like nothing you can control. That's so frightening. And that's essentially what's happening to the people underground. They have no real control over what's happening to their own bodies. They have no free will, and completely no free will. So
Yeah, that's a fair point, Shira. I mean, I don't mean to certainly. I don't mean to belittle the acts of the tethered and the accomplishment that they end up achieving at the end. I am trying to see this. I think this film is asking us to view it metaphorically, because if you view it literally, it's kind of a mess, which maybe I'll get into a little bit later. But and so in that sense, I'm trying to piece together what that final image means, and if there's an extra commentary about both the failure of Hands Across America and how that indicates our inability to deal with real issues, and rather privilege symbolic gestures over real solutions. Does that make sense?
oh yeah, it was a complete failure. It was silly. It's a silly, I agree, it was a silly thing. But I honestly think that's why it's so awesome that someone was able to achieve it though, right? Like it's such a silly, ridiculous thing. That's why it failed. But they managed to figure out how to make it happen. And it was to go over mountains and rivers that others couldn't. And yeah, I mean that's literally how we fight for things, right? We come across more hardships than others might be willing to. A privileged class would be like, you know, I don't need to put myself through all this fucking shit. But other people need to actually get through some much harder parts of their life. They need to go into deeper waters or higher hills, because that's the only way they can get or try to be as equal as possible. So it doesn't mean that they'll be equal, but
And in that sense, I mean, we think of the ending. We're tempted to see the ending as, well, I want to say hollow, right? It's the same act that it is a similar physical act to Hands Across America done successfully. But when you think about the tethered, these are people with no language. These are people who are, you know, that have far less of an ability to do what the people who initiated Hands Across America did, and they did it more successfully. So there's a sense in which just that alone is triumphant to a large degree. I mean, what are they going to do? Come together and say, no, I'm taking your job, and you're going to go down. I mean, it's the worst thing they could have done is to engage in something like that. I think the mere act of doing what was not successful by those above is not hollow. It's absolutely triumphant. And the moral ambiguity aside, you know, I think it's something to, I guess I would call this somewhat of a triumphant ending. I mean, it's weirdly, I feel morally dirty saying that, but at the same time, I see sort of the reckoning and the overcoming, and I want to give credit where credit is due. But at the same time, like most everybody's dead. I'd be dead in like 3 seconds. Bitch would come right through this room, and I'd be gone. All of us would be.
You know, there's actually something interesting that happens in that, right? Like when the family that was hanging out in their big giant house with their biatch yacht, there was a discussion that I swear to fuck I've had with my husband where I'm like, I heard something outside, and he's like, I'm busy. What are you doing? I'm sitting here. There could be a monster outside, and there's no monster. It's like I swear when I was listening to that, I was like, I looked at Daniel, I was like, that's you. You do that when I'm scared, and I tell you I'm scared, and you're just like, I'm sitting though.
I shit you not, I did that like a week ago, Shira. I did that like a week ago.
I could see it. I could see it.
It's so bad that we have Nest cams, and I was like, hold on, wait a minute. And I sat there, and I just like flipped on my phone. I'm like, no, there's no one out there. Like, I'm not getting up.
Oh my God. I swear you and Daniel are so similar sometimes, but like, I swear I've seen this, like, everything's fine. I would like to, here's another Easter egg for you guys. The twins in the movie, first off, obvious duality going on there with having twins in there. But I would like to give you guys a little bit of background. Those actresses are Emma, which is Ross and Rachel's daughter, Emma, from Friends. Those twins have grown up and now they are in scary movies, and they got to die 5 times in the film, which is fun. But yeah, that's Emma died 5 times is the way that I have looked at this film now.
Well, this film suddenly got a shitload more horrifying. Okay.
Yeah, Ross and Rachel are none too happy, I'm sure.
About those twins, there was one other thing. I guess so like I'm just like completely stealing this from the wisecrack analysis of this, which, by the way, they got a lot of shit wrong, and I was really surprised, right? Like, one thing that they mentioned toward the end of the movie about how Adelaide was kind of like one of the tethered, because she tries to take a trinket from one of the people that she's killed and like tries to steal the necklace of red. I mean, that was the key to the handcuffs. I like, she was just trying to unlock her handcuffs. So yeah, I don't know, like, step up your game, wisecrack. But this other thing was actually really interesting. So when we're at the fairgrounds in the beginning of the movie, the guy that owns do what?
I just said shade thrown.
Oh, hell yeah, I'll throw some more shade too. Just give me a minute. Let me get into my shit. All right, so at the beginning of the movie, when they're in the fairgrounds, and the guy that is running the whack-a-mole game is wearing a black flag shirt. Can we talk about that for a second? I think this is obviously like one big symbol of kind of like a countercultural mindset. Like, I don't know if you know anything about the band, and like, obviously I'm not like a huge fan or whatever like that. I don't follow all of their work, but that's kind of their theme. They're kind of like one of these bands, kind of like Rage Against the Machine, where they're supposed to be taking this perspective of kind of like a countercultural revolutionary mindset. And so that's really interesting. But on the other side of that, whenever we have the time skip and we move forward, one of the twins on the beach is wearing a black flag shirt of kind of like one of the newer versions. It's kind of like, it's like white and has like the black symbol on it. And I really feel like that's a fantastic way to symbolize how class culture is sort of brought up in this movie, right? So it's like you have kind of like an affluent sort of upper middle class family, and one of the kids is sort of absorbing this symbol and completely making it meaningless and shallow, and kind of just like using it as a fashion statement. And I thought that was kind of like a really fantastic little thing that got thrown in there. I don't know if that's necessarily like an Easter egg, but it was a nice touch. It was definitely a nice touch.
Wisecrack should start their own podcast and call it the Over Analysis Podcast. You know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? That was a terrible joke. I'm going to edit this out. This never happened.
No, it was good. It was good. Joke.
I have another Easter egg.
Okay.
Okay, so as some of you may know, I am from Northern California, and Santa Cruz was definitely a place I went to all the fucking time with my family, with my friends. There's tons of pictures of me and my best friend on the beach, me on her shoulders and us flexing. I mean, I have tons of stuff from Santa Cruz, but one of the main reasons why Santa Cruz was so huge for me was because that's where Lost Boys was filmed. And I mean, I swear I was seeing shots of this and I was like, cry, little sister. I was like, yeah. But they actually give a call out to Lost Boys. Now, I will give Jordan Peele this. He actually said they were in Santa Cruz. Lost Boys didn't say that. They made up some stupid town name. So, you know what? Thank you for giving some shout out to NorCal. But they, at one point, the parents are fighting and arguing at the fair, and the mom said something about they're filming a movie at the carousel. And I was like, oh shit, this is happening right alongside the filming of Lost Boys. That's great. They're trying to make a little joke there. I thought that was fun.
I got that Easter egg. I'm deleting all my Easter eggs here, and we're coming down to it. That was definitely one I had. So the obvious stuff, Frisbee landing on the circle, super obvious, right? It's like double layered. That's like Bloodbath and Beyond metaphor right there. The sunlight and the shadows, right? Same sort of level, Bloodbath and Beyondish. The family sticker on the car, like the tethered thing. Very simple analogies, even very simple analogies. I'm not going to say what I wanted to say. At the beach house. yeah. I have no idea what you're talking about. What shade? At the beach house, everyone, when they're eating like lunch or something, everyone's eating lunch from like fast food, from like blue packaging. But Adelaide is eating red strawberries, which oddly enough, I posted this on Instagram. I was eating red vines. Didn't even put that together until I sat there. And I was like, this is weird. It's got really like Meta. Here's a deep one. I bet you guys, this is one you guys didn't catch. I 100% didn't catch this. Ready? I'm gonna look at your faces. Don't fucking lie if you caught this. In Red's speech to, I think it's Adelaide, she said, or they're in the house. When they first break into the house, Red says, I had a little girl and she was born laughing. And then I had a little boy and he was born in fire, right? That is, if you reverse it, that is how the doppelganger kids die, right? The daughter dies laughing. She gets chucked from the car, lands on the branch. She laughs, she dies. So she dies that way. And then the son walks backwards into the fire. So Red is basically saying this is how they were born, but they actually die. So there's like this birth, death, backwards, reversal, shadowy shit going on that I caught, which was odd. Did any of you catch that? I couldn't tell.
Nope, I did not catch that. You win.
+5 internets for me, guys. Awesome.
You win this game.
All right, so if I can, let me just say, like you're mentioning Bloodbath and Beyond really quick. I'm gonna go ahead and like mention something really quick. So like I obviously I think this is a fantastic film, and I'm not gonna just sort of jump into my overall summary and like grading here or whatever. But I think it was a great film, man. Like this was fantastic. It's really sort of indicative of Jordan Peele's skill that he was able to do a complete, like maybe like a grand slam in his first film, and then maybe like a home run in his second, but also like it's just phenomenal. It's really hard to nitpick this movie. I did have like one kind of issue, right? And so I think that the ending, when they do that sort of twist and you kind of find out what's really going on here about the role reversal, like, yes, there are some like tidbits and some like layering that's going on to kind of like indicate maybe there's something, but I don't necessarily know if I buy it that she forgot her history, right? So it's like some of the conversations that she had with Red, for instance, like at the very beginning, whenever Adelaide was face to face with Red as an adult, I feel like she is supposed to know who that person is. And like, that's why she's so freaked out. Like, I don't think she forgot her history at all. And whenever Red and Adelaide are talking toward the ending, and she's sort of talking about your people and my people and the tethered and explaining what's going on, it's a little bit weird because Adelaide should know this kind of stuff, right? And I'm not necessarily sure if they really kind of earned the ending that they had. I mean, it's like a really good ending, and like most of the film itself is like just fantastic. So like all of it is really good, but there's a little bit of a disjointedness there. And that's kind of like my one big complaint is that like whenever I left the theater, I was like, does that really make sense? And I did watch it a second time to just kind of like go back and see if, maybe I just missed some things, but I was still like, I mean, like, yes, there are some breadcrumbs along the way, but it's still not, it's not one of those points where you see the ending and you're like, oh my God, now everything makes sense. It's like, wait a minute, you've got to like push some of this stuff away.
You do.
The way that this ties back to Bloodbath and Bed and Beyond and whatever, is that like their complaint, if you go back to like their Twitter, you can kind of see this. It's like about the pacing and the uneventfulness. That's totally just like objectively fucking wrong. I mean, like the pacing in this film, I think, is absolutely fantastic. You get just enough time to have the family development. The conflict is sort of, the problem is defined quite well. You have kind of like the struggle back and forth. You've even got like the tense moments broken up with just the right amount of comedy. There are kills that happen, so like there's still like that little bit of an adrenaline rush that you kind of expect from a horror movie, and it sort of keeps moving along. Like there's a sequentiality to it that I think perfectly makes sense. And there's plenty in this movie to like keep you interested, and there is definitely a crescendo at the ending, which I personally really love. Which, by the way, to kind of like go on like a little sub point here about like sort of dance that's sort of tied into horror. I feel like the ending of this, where you see this person sort of fighting their shadow to this sort of like orchestral style music, and there's dance tied into that, is kind of like a symbol of the struggle that's happening. I think it's fucking brilliant. It works so well for a horror movie. But their complaint is just so utterly simplistic and kind of like missing the point that it's dumbfounding. I really can't understand it. Like I have a hard time taking the perspective of somebody who could look at this movie and think, it's kind of boring. I mean, I think we already mentioned this like at one point, but like whenever I was in the theater and I watched this the first time, the crowd was alive. I mean, there was laughter, there were screams, there was like, oh shits, you know, people were reacting to this film more than any other film that I've seen in a theater. And I think it was a fantastic experience, but like it outweighed even the reactions to whenever I'd go see a new Star Wars movie, and those usually get pretty good reactions. But this was just on a whole other level. Like, people were loving this film. Nobody was bored. And it just, I don't know, it baffles the mind. I don't understand how you could give this like a mediocre kind of like meh rating if you watch the same movie that I watched. Yeah, I don't know. End rant, I guess.
These are the same people who said It Follows was about AIDS or like STDs. So that's all you need to know.
Well, go ahead. Do you have more, Noah?
Wait,
let's just say no. Let's just say no.
No, I think we need to cover. Okay, so just so you guys know, there's this stupid podcast that we have beef with, all right? I'm going to put it that way. We don't like this podcast very much because they tend to be a little dude bro-y. And Noah got very upset with them today and exchanged words on Twitter. But one of the things he did was he researched their way of rating a lot of films, and he found that a lot of their really ridiculous, like 420 beach babe sorority girl type films get high ratings, and then they give a low rating to this film. And Noah was not happy about this and kind of went crazy on Twitter.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had kind of, and I've had this debate with them before. It's really a debate about objectivity and subjectivity. I told them that no one is saying that you're morally obligated or rationally obligated to say that Us is like it was less enjoyable than, you know, boss babes from outer space, you know, vampire chicks from, you know, 1833 or whatever the fuck films they've done. There was one about a bunny rabbit that has a giant dick that kills people, right? They rated that one higher than Jordan Peele's Us. And I said, you know, there's nothing wrong with enjoying those films more. This is why I made the distinction at the beginning of this podcast. Like, you can enjoy a particular film and it's entirely subjective. Enjoy the fuck out of it. Enjoy it more than Us. That's fine. But when you start to have these metrics of how you rate a film, there's a degree of objectivity. If there isn't, then you're just essentially saying at the end of the day, when you rate it, another way of saying that you liked it or disliked it, right? There's, you know, there's objective shit, there's subjective shit. And, you know, if you're going to say something fairly controversial like that, which I think it's controversial to say Us gets a lower rating than like Dick Rabbit Killer 69, you know, then maybe you should justify that a little more. That's all. That's all I was saying. I was called an elitist because of that, which is, you know, it's semi-fair. So that's how that happened. Anyway, so I have one for you, and this is another Easter egg I bet you didn't catch. I'm going to be really happy if you didn't catch this one. What was the name of the white woman, the Mother Vodka clock? We said her name before, I forget.
Kitty.
Okay. So they're at the beach. Kitty says, "Oh, did you see? I got something different. Little plastic surgery thing, right? That's why her doppelganger cuts her face."
Yep. I got that one.
Bastards. All right, I'll think of another one. All right, okay. I'm going to take that one off the list. Sorry.
Well, I want to pick up on something Ben was saying as he was throwing shade at Bloodbath and Beyond, and as we sort of wandered down that rabbit hole. I can't use the same word twice. Yeah, right. That's I deserve that. But yeah, I think you're right, Ben, when you say that if you're going to interpret this film as a genre film and how well it executes and delivers the expectations of the horror genre, that is, do we have interesting action sequences, aka kills? Do we have suspense? Do we have horrific, creepy characters in some cases? Yeah, like it checks all of the boxes just objectively. And we've been talking a lot about this film metaphorically. If we were to try to talk about this film literally and in terms of the world building, I do think there are some legitimate issues. Now, whether Bloodbath and Beyond actually draws these distinctions between viewing it as a genre film, viewing it as a literal story, and viewing it as a metaphor, I don't know. I have better things to do with my time than listen. But nevertheless, I think that when you draw those distinctions, it succeeds on 2 of those 3 levels. It succeeds as a genre film, and it succeeds as a metaphor. Literally, however, it's got some problems. I mean,
yes. Oh, yes.
on a very simple level, where did they get 325 million pairs of scissors?
Where do they shit? Where do they shit? This bothered me. I'm sorry, Jim. Where do they shit? Anyway.
Where do they shit is a world building issue, which not a lot of movies have the courage to go into, but I'm glad that you have the courage to demand it. But where do they get if their entire lives are spent mirroring the actions of the doppelgangers upstairs, then where do they have the chance to, or how do they have the chance to organize their Hands Across the America campaign? If my day is spent doing all the things that Jim above is doing, then how do I have time to also organize a coup? And then get matching red jumpsuits for everybody. And now I know they try to explain this with Adelaide saying, well, I trained them while I was down there. But that doesn't, I don't know if that really fits. And I don't know if that really works in terms, and are you trying to also tell me that nobody's gone into the tunnels in all of these years? It was only Adelaide in all of the years since this experiment has been around? That seems to defy some degree of I mean, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, and I'm willing to, sort of give the movie points as it relates to being a good genre film and a good metaphor, but as a literal story, it's got some problems as it relates to its world building. It didn't necessarily bother me, but I will have to say that when we give our final scores in a little while, I am going to be a little bit lower on this film, because the good films, the great films rather, I'm still going to recommend it. I'm still going to be fairly high, but the good and great films are the ones that are able to do both metaphor and literal story at the same time. If we're going to compare this to Get Out works as a metaphor. Get Out works as a literal story. Get Out works as a genre film. It works on all 3 of those levels. So I don't know. Am I the only one that some of the world building bothered, or did that affect some of you as well?
No. I mean, I think that kind of like plays into my at least part of my criticism, is that like at least like the literal story doesn't necessarily like line up completely in all parts. And like, I really think I was telling Noah about this after I first saw the film, is that I think maybe it might be part of Jordan Peele's style to just not explain a whole lot. I think like there's a lot that just sort of happens, and we're just sort of led to accept it. I don't know. Like, and I don't necessarily know if like having to suspend belief is like a good thing or a bad thing. And like usually I kind of count it as a bad thing depending on the movie. But there's so much other stuff kind of like going on here that I tend to forgive it, right? And I think that's kind of really just, yeah, like it just sort of like depicts his individual sort of style of filmmaking. I don't know, like maybe I am being too forgiving, but I definitely did think that there were just some gaps here where there were a lot of layers and a lot of interesting pieces tucked into this movie, but maybe they weren't all like tied together perfectly well in like this complete flowing kind of like coherent, perfectly watertight way. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, but I have a really hard time counting off points for that, just because there is so much shit in here that is just like fantastically brilliant, so I tend to be forgiving.
I think I'm with Jim on this. Oh, go ahead, Sherry. I know you want to say something.
I just want to throw this out here. Jordan Peele is definitely you can tell he likes Hitchcock and is maybe even trying to be the next Hitchcock, right? But one of the things that Hitchcock taught us all, and this is me quoting him, logic is dull. So yes, you can sit there and piece apart some of the things that don't make sense, but that's dull. Some of the fun to murder and mystery and vampires and werewolves. Yes, you can pick things apart. Sparkly vampires, you know, oh, what the fuck is this shit? We can pick those things apart. But at the end of the day, was it an entertaining film? And so I think that's a huge part of what Peele is trying to put forth. Like Goonies, the Goonies, of course, is referenced in this film. It's so much fun. It's the most ridiculous fucking concept ever. A bunch of kids underground trying to find pirate treasure, and then they save their entire fucking neighborhood. It's ridiculous, but it's fun. And I think there is something to be said about having some fun in a film, especially if there's a message behind it, which is to help your fellow man or to come together. So I'm not trying to shit on what you're saying, because obviously all of your arguments are fucking right? Like, you're right. Your logic is correct. I'm not arguing your logic. But it's kind of dull, right? Like, sometimes it's just fun to throw in some crazy shit like red jumpsuits and scissors.
I'm going to hold you to that, because one of the arguments we had outside of this podcast, I'm letting some of you outsiders in, that's not metaphorical at all, is one of my favorite films ever is Lady in the Water. I know it sounds insane. This is the one that I defend that everyone else hates. And part of the justification for everyone else in this podcast doesn't like it is exactly the opposite of what you just said, which is it's entirely illogical in many ways, makes very little sense. So I am going to assume, Shayra, from your comments that you will be on my side, because that is how I defend Lady in the Water.
The argument I'm making is that it needs to be entertaining, though. So
oh, God. Oh, I felt that. Jesus.
Oh, that was the greatest.
Oh. Ouch.
Sorry,
Water. Thank you,
How the fuck do I segue out of that? Look, I'll say this with regard to Ben and Jim, what you guys are talking about. I can forgive, this is not really a phrase, but I'm going to use it. I can forgive what I like to think of as like Lovecraftian gaps, where I don't understand something, but I'm scared in the non-understanding of the thing, right? What I can't forgive is logistical gaps. Like, how the fuck do they shit? Like, that gnaws on my left, like, I'm left-brained, and I can forgive a certain amount of it. I can suspend disbelief. I don't even find it as a flaw, because like all film, first, you can argue at a certain point is a suspension of disbelief. I don't mind that, but they just add it up too much. You know, just where are they getting the bunnies? Are they cloning the bunnies? Where are they getting the clothes? How is she putting? Where's all the scissors? There's just so many questions. At a certain point, I'm just like, I don't buy it, so I got to take away points for that. Like, this is for me, the largest flaw of this film is that it relied so heavily maybe on metaphor, relied so heavy on Easter eggs, as we've clearly gone through tonight. I still have one more, by the way, that I got to take away points for it. Whereas maybe we could, let's compare this to something like The Endless, where there's certain things that don't make sense, even certain things that are just never answered. But there's this like overarching sense of dread related to those questions that make them things of value and cinematically that you just sort of forgive them for. Does that make any kind of sense? So they're not like very obvious logistical concerns. They're just I don't understand what the fuck, and I don't understand. I kind of don't want to understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's what the film sets out. Like in Endless, we're following those characters' journeys on trying to figure out what's going on, and they never really figure out everything that's going on. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that as an ending. This film is deliberately trying to build a world and build a mythology, and there are aspects of the mythology that don't make sense on a literal level. That's all I'm saying, and I'm still going to recommend this film. Like, if I were on Rotten Tomatoes, my review would still be fresh. I would still, and I understand the idea of saying, well, the metaphor works and the genre elements work well enough where that I'm willing to forgive those things. Likewise, I'm willing to forgive those things because I'm going to recommend the film at the end of this. But I'm also not going to ignore the fact that a lot of this doesn't make sense from a literal, how do they plan this thing story premise, from a literal, how do they plan this thing story framework. When I'm putting myself into a literal interpretation of this film, it does fall short. That's all I'm saying. I also want to respond to the Hitchcock analogy, and also sort of bring up one of the comments in our chat. Ask in the chat, is Gordon Peele this generation's Stanley Kubrick? Please. I think that that's actually a better comparison to a past master of horror, because Kubrick was incredibly metaphorical. Hitchcock was incredibly literal. He, like, Rear Window is not a metaphor for anything. It's a literal story that does have sort of larger themes and interpretations that go along with it. But I think that it's not meant to be a metaphor for something else, whereas I think this deliberately and clearly is. So for me, Jordan Peele isn't the next Hitchcock, he's the next Kubrick, because he's dealing more in metaphor than Hitchcock is.
He's gonna have to work a little harder to be a Kubrick for me. So
yeah, I was about to say.
I'm sorry, you guys are giving him way more credit than he's due, and I'm not even shitting on Peele. I'm excited about where he's going, and I hope he goes to really amazing places. I saw some original Hitchcock and Kubrick stuff, and it wasn't the most fantastic, and it got exponentially better. So obviously Peele has his whole career ahead of him, and we'll see. But
let's do this post Candyman. Once Peele does Candyman, let's come back and we'll have the we'll have the debate whether he's up there with Kubrick or not. This is where Garrett would shit all over this. I made the mistake of posting online that the two horror directors that I will watch every film of that I think are nailing it out of the park is Ari Aster, who did Hereditary and Midsommar, which isn't out yet, and Jordan Peele. And he was like, Ari Aster only made one movie, and I was like, well, Jordan Peele made two. So we're gonna have to have a debate at some point whether these guys are masters or not. I'm gonna give Peele till his remake of Candyman.
He's still a baby. He's still a baby writer. Yeah, I do have high hopes for him, and in a way, that's kind of a lot of the hardship of this film, right? Because Get Out was so huge, and then you go into this, and everybody's comparing it to that, and is it good enough? Is it better? Is it going to be as good? Is it going to mean something for his career? So, like, when you knock one out of the park that hard, and then you have another one coming up, it's really hard. I mean, when it comes to the music industry, TV shows, movies, whatever, if you all of a sudden boom, you better always boom. And so I think that's one of his hardships, honestly, right?
Yeah, yeah, when Peele makes a shitty film, that may be more important than these two that we've been discussing. This would be interesting to kind of go to that and talk about it. I don't know.
And even if he does make a fuck up, does that mean he's shit? I mean, no, sometimes you make some shit and then you come back out of it. So
you know who doesn't make shit? The doppelgangers. I still don't understand that. I don't. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's a problem for me. That I literally am going to drop it like a 1.5 points for that. Anyway. I got one more Easter egg. And this is the stretch one. Remember I said at the beginning this one may be a stretch, but I don't think it is. I want to know if you think it's a stretch. The police being 14 minutes out, 14 minutes late. 14th Amendment. And he says, it's too long. 14 minutes? It's too long. Took too much time. 14th Amendment. 14 minutes. I don't know. Thought there was something there. You guys are looking at me like a deer caught in the headlights. I don't know what the fuck's happening, but I thought there was something there.
It is a stretch. Interesting, though.
Mm-hmm.
If they had said, oh, they're 13, 14, or 15 minutes out, I would be more willing to say, oh, that makes, yeah, now I see it.
Or you know, the Bloodbath and Beyond version would be 14 minutes out. You know what that reminds me of? The 14th Amendment. Boy, that took too long. You know, you got to heavy-handedly put that in there. I'm sorry for shitting on your channel. I really am. Kind of. Like 80% sorry.
At least you're shitting on something, unlike the doppelganger.
Yeah, again, no idea how to segue. That's all my Easter eggs. Do you guys have any more? That is all. We went through all of mine.
I feel like I had more, but you know, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna be like, I forgot to mention this. I should have wrote notes. I'm a horrible person. I will say this: there is something really interesting for me as a Northern Californian who was raised around Sacramento. I did not know this until later on in my life, but apparently we have a weird word we use that I did not know that everybody else used a different word. We use this word called crawdad. Everyone else calls it crawfish or crayfish, but we say crawdad where I come from.
Same.
So what's funny is crawdad was on Dad's boat. He was crawdaddy on his boat, and I was like, hell yeah, represent. It's not a fish, motherfuckers. You motherfuckers, it's not a fish. So it's not a dad necessarily either, though.
Shayra, we used to live on the border. Danielle and I used to live on the border of Louisiana, and in Danielle's backyard, I believe, for a while, they would have these holes where they would, I guess, catch them or fish for them. I don't know how the fuck they. Mud. That's right. That's right. So they would do that. This has nothing to do with this podcast. I'm sorry. When we got married, Danielle and I flew. We had our honeymoon in Las Vegas. We flew out there, and we literally flew there the day we got married. We go out there. We go to a buffet in Vegas the next day, right? So it's the day after we got married, and she goes straight for the crawdads, and she has her veil on. She's got like white on, and she starts cracking open crawdads, and I'm sitting there eating like steak, and she's just sitting there, Louisiana, just bam, 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 knocking them down. I was like, I made a good decision, made a great decision. So I'm right there with you. Right there with you. Yes, we should wrap up.
It's good eating.
Oh my God, it's amazing. It's amazing eating.
And honestly, crawdaddy is like the best name for a boat. I think it's better than biatch. I don't know. Biatched? Like biatch? Like,
yeah, that's a joke that I would make. That's a pun that we would start this podcast with.
Right?
You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
It's too dad. Fun. It's way too dad. Crawdaddy is a little better. I like it better.
Yeah. Let's wrap up our thoughts. I guess I can start because I selected the movie. So what else notes do I have? You know, I have a little section here for my summary for like the normative takeaway from this movie, at least for me. I started the podcast by sort of talking about, trying to focus in on the sort of personal aspects of this movie, move a little bit away from the societal duality and make it a little more personal. After all, you know, there's a reason the Hall of Mirrors sign that we see in this movie has a thing above it that says, find yourself, which is really important. Find yourself. We're our own worst enemies. There's a sense in which, again, this has been mentioned throughout the podcast, that this is largely a film about hypocrisy, which I think has just been underscored the more we've been talking about it. It's about like the privileges we enjoy without ever really giving a thought to whose back had to break in order to get us there. So there's these societal components, there's these personal components, there's duality on multiple levels. It's very open for interpretation. That's the part that I find very Jordan Peele. The sort of the metaphorical takeaway from his films tend to be, or they're getting more open-ended. I don't see that as a negative. I certainly enjoy that. I would just like to know how they shit. That's all I care about. Metaphor open-ended, logistics of shitting close-ended. Overall, I dug this film. This is a great horror film. I started this by sort of, and everyone's going to do this, unfortunately, comparing it to Get Out. And Get Out is the superior film in my mind. It's much more cerebral. It's less visceral. It's more of a mind fuck. It's less of a traditional horror film. I felt like this was more traditional horror. But that said, this is a fantastic horror film that I will recommend to everybody I see. It's one of the best, probably the second best horror film of 2019 to me. With next week, the film we're doing next Sunday night being my number one, which is Gaspar Noé's Climax. So definitely a great film. It has a lot to offer. It's funny as fuck. It's scary as fuck. It works on multiple levels. It's got metaphor. It talks about something fundamental to the human experience. It hits all of the things that I think make horror films good, right? Informative, important, lasting, more than just jump scares and viscera. And I don't know, those are valuable things in an age of bloodbath and beyond. Jesus. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I would probably rate this film, man. I want to say like a 7.5 out of 10, which is a little lower than I had hoped. But that's sort of where I sit. So may change. I don't think it will. I think I'm going to score it a 7.5 out of 10 overall. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, I'll go next. I think this film works as a metaphor, and I think it works as a genre film. I think a lot of what I was going to say as my closing is what I kind of said in a little bit responding to the Bloodbath and Beyond conversation, essentially as a literal story and as literal world building, it does fall short. But all of the things you're saying about the film as a metaphor really, really work for me. And I think it's an important film, even though I think Get Out is probably more important. I think Get Out is probably one of the most important films of this decade. And so, yeah, I like this movie a lot. One of the things I want to talk about just briefly before we go, at one point there's a thing that jumps out at her in the funhouse mirror in her initial journey down there, and that's a jump scare. And then on her subsequent journey down the escalator, so to speak, that jump scare comes out again, and she just smashes it in the face. And it doesn't work as a jump scare. It just works as sort of this badass moment of her with a fireplace tool. And I think that kind of works as sort of a way to understand Jordan Peele's understanding of horror genre conventions writ large. He knows when to use the jump scares and the horror conventions to get the cheap thrill, but he also knows when to subvert those genre conventions and horror thrills. And I think that is sort of that indicates his control over his art, his control over the genre of horror, his understanding of this genre, and how to use it how to use the trappings of the genre well. And that makes me even more optimistic for his subsequent films, and even for the Twilight Zone series, which he's going to be bringing to CBS All Access. I don't know if that's going to get me to subscribe where no one has subscribed before. Sort of joke on their Star Trek reboot. So yeah, I really like it. I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. It's still a recommend. It's still a relatively high rating for me. It's the literal aspects of the world building that bring it down from a metaphorical, or bring it down as a whole for me.
Okay, I guess you're running to end, Ben. Is that it? Yeah, okay. I did remember some of the stuff I wanted to bring up, so I apologize. I'm going to do some of my I don't know if they're Easter eggs, but my random thoughts that I had. If you guys want to comment on it, I understand. One of the other things I noticed was rock, paper, scissors kept coming up. You have the people playing rock, paper, scissors, and then you had the scissors, obviously, as a weapon. There was the rock. There was a geode object that the son managed to get and kill Kitty's doppelganger with. And then obviously the paper, when she was cutting up the paper down below and then split the little paper people that were holding hands. So the rock, paper, scissors kept coming up. There was the question of if the sun was a shadow sun, that maybe, and I know there's a lot of people that say this isn't possible, but when the sun got lost, there's a new sun that could have been replaced, and that maybe the scarred sun was when he finally figured out the magic trick and may have burned his face. And so they may have been switched, and maybe she could recognize that was why her son was actually the one who was dying in the fire and why she screamed out. And here's my own little take on the Crawdaddy boat. The Crawdaddy boat always veered left, but it wasn't exactly reliable and tend to shut down sometimes and not work so great for us. And I felt like maybe, I don't know if it is, but it might be a metaphor for how the Democratic Party is working out for us right now. It's like it veers left, but it keeps breaking down.
I don't know about you, but I would have voted for Obama for a third term. So, you know.
Oh no. Okay. So sorry, I didn't think of some of those things. I don't know if you guys want to comment on them or not. But anyway, I liked this film. When I went into the theater, everybody was very exuberant. I mean, there was two guys on either side of us that just kept making commentary, and they were just like, "Oh no, don't go in there." And when they got to the hide a key, and he was like, "What kind of white shit is hide a key?" I think he's able to unlock the door. I mean, everybody around us was just like, "Oh shit," and freaking out. So I don't know. It was a fun movie to go see live with other people. I don't normally recommend to watch a movie in a theater because I am a reclusive fuck. But I recommend watching this movie with people because the reactions from the audience are great. And we talked about this. I know that it's not available for people to watch, but Noah and Elle and I had a discussion about Scream, and we discussed the kind of excitement that happened in the theater. People laughing, screaming. People started shouting, "Do we? Do we? Do we?" I mean, it was so like exciting. That's what theater should be. Like, in a way, I believe that the audience should be part of the story. I don't like this idea of, shh, this is a library, everybody shut up. I hate those theaters. I want to be around people that have opinions and jokes. I went to go see The Room live with my daughter, and people are throwing plastic spoons at the screen, going spoon, and people had all these like lines that they knew with the film, and it just added to it. Theater started out with audience participation, and now we have this weird idea that we have to just sit there and just sit. What fucking boring ass shit is that? This film brought back some fun theater memories for me. So it actually moved it up for me because I watched it with people excited by it.
Did you throw scissors at the screen, Cheryl, for this one?
No, I didn't. Okay. I didn't know to bring scissors. So next time I'll definitely make sure to possibly endanger the other audience members.
This will be the last podcast Shira does with us. I just want to announce that.
I'll be in jail later. But no, I mean, I had so much fun watching it and hearing everybody's excitement. So, and lots of laughter. Can I point that out? This was actually a comedy movie for a huge chunk of it. Like, there was so many comedy moments, especially from the dad, who we see as a badass in Black Panther. And now, you know, he's kind of a dad. Like, that's the best way to put it. He's such a dad. He has his dad puns, his dad jokes. He doesn't even kick ass as well as everybody's like, you got one, you got one, you got one, I got two. It's like, oh, congrats, dad. Good job, dad. So it was kind of fun. I know some people are probably annoyed by his character, but I related because I am married to a dad. So I understand the problems of dealing with a dad. Anyway, I give this 4 out of 5. I think this is a really fun film, and I enjoyed it immensely. It got higher rating for me because of the enjoyment factor, though, because I was entertained and laughing and screaming. So
that is a higher rating than a 420 Massacre. So I am super happy that you rated it that. Perfect.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. All right. What to say about this? As somebody who is kind of a fan of psychology, I really do actually like the Jungian stuff. I know that, you know, maybe Noah, right? Like he looks at this and like brings up the point, maybe with a little bit of a scorn, and like obviously there's some who and there's some woo or whatever associated with Jung's work. But I really do think it's actually quite fascinating, and like the idea of having cultural archetypes and psychological archetypes, I think is fascinating, and I think it works in a lot of situations. Especially in storytelling, right? And like this is the perfect way to sort of bring up the sort of like the shadow, that darker part within all of us that we try to suppress. And thinking about that, I think, is the perfect way to think about American culture and just a lot of different aspects of our daily lives. I just really, I think that's probably the part of this that really sticks out the most to me is kind of like that metaphoric value. I know Jim and Noah, both you really put a lot of weight on kind of like the literal interpretations and the logistics. But I think I can perfectly well enjoy a film and like appreciate a film that has no plot. You know, I mean, like that stuff really doesn't weight quite as highly for me. I think as a piece of art, and that's really how kind of I try to approach really good horror films as a piece of art. They don't necessarily have to be entirely coherent, though at points it does get a little bit distracting for this, as I've talked about. not necessarily the specifics about how they get a million pairs of scissors, but really just in how they earn kind of different plot points that they try to use to move the story along and make it more interesting. And of course, as I've said, the best example of that is the very ending, whenever we find out that Adelaide was actually red from the very beginning, and that there was kind of a little bit of a switcheroo there, and that totally changes the entire meaning of the film. I don't necessarily think they earned that. But the elements here of duality, of the consequences of sort of like suppressing the darker parts of yourself, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And that's something that I can't speak enough about, is especially in a podcast where we sort of laud the value and the importance of horror, is taking a look at those parts of ourselves which we don't normally want to take a look at, that we hide from the light, which we keep out of the sort of public view. Like, how important it is to take a look at those, analyze them, process them, make sense of them, and use them, and sort of like be one with them in a way that is healthy and enriches our existence in a way. Like, I don't know, like, not to get too pretentious, I guess, with that point, but that's a huge part of like early psychology, is that whenever you suppress something, it tends to blow up in a way that is sort of a little bit unpredictable, and a thousand times more serious than it would have been otherwise if you just dealt with the problem head on. And I can't think of a better analogy for America than that. Yes, we have this history that is dark, that we seem to ignore, that we look over, we fail to acknowledge. And because of that, we continuously have these repetitive problems of class conflict, of race conflict, that just keep coming back to bite us in the ass and probably drag us down from becoming a better nation than if we would just sort of face them, acknowledge that there were mistakes made, and make good on those mistakes, and sort of move on from there. And not like it, and really not even to offer any solutions about that, but just to point out that by sort of ignoring the negative aspects of who we are as a people, we're really kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. The only way to move forward, I think, is to make peace with that other side of ourselves, acknowledge it, and make it a part of who we are, and move forward. So yeah, I mean, like, obviously this has like an element to it that I find that it is culturally important. And that's probably one of the number one things for me in terms of how I should rate a horror movie. I've talked to Jim about this before, that if I were in control of the Oscars, no film would be nominated, or even, well, maybe not nominated, I don't know if I can control that, but like, no film should win an award for Best Picture, or, you know, many of the other awards that are provided, unless it has some sort of import to the culture in which it is introduced. Like, I mean, there's a larger role that we can say for film is present, and that is to bring out aspects of our society which we don't normally want to take a look at in an artistic way, in a way that conveys a huge amount of meaning with a limited number of resources and amount of time, in a way that we can all connect with. That's one of the great virtues of horror, I think, is like, it's uniquely positioned to be able to do some of that. Anyway, to get back around to this movie, yes, I think it definitely does all of those things. And while it might not make sense narratively in all aspects, while it doesn't feature gallons and gallons of blood being spilled, it doesn't have a million jump scares, there's no sex, I guess, to speak of, there's no drug use. You know, I mean, some things are just fucking more important, guys. Come on, really, get over yourselves. Yeah, so like, and anyway, like, I do think Get Out is probably a little bit better. I agree with you guys on that, but I'm gonna have to give this a 4 pairs of golden bronze Chinese scissors out of 5, and that's kind of where I stand on this. Fantastic. People should watch this movie.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. That's a great way to end it. So we're doing Climax next week. This is where I insert about 37 sex jokes, but I'm just gonna say it's a great French film. So watch it with us. Actually, do you guys know if Climax is available on any streaming sites? I probably should have figured that out before I said we're going to do that.
No, it's still in its theatrical run. But
yeah, there's still a couple cinemas in LA down here that are showing it. Anyway, we're doing Climax. If you acquire it in some way on the interwebs, unbeknownst to any of us on this podcast, please feel free to join us next Sunday night at 6 p.m. We are now doing this podcast every Sunday night. We used to do it every 2 Sunday nights, every other Sunday night, rather. Now we're doing it every Sunday night. So join us. Check us out on social media, clearly on Twitter. I'm causing a ruckus. So Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you for joining tonight's podcast. We will see you next week for Gasper Noise Clinics.